Question 1. Examination of the data shows that a potential conflict of interest has arisen concerning a client's investment strategy. You have discovered information that, if acted upon discreetly, could lead to a significant personal financial gain for an acquaintance. But this action would not directly benefit the client and might even introduce a subtle risk not fully disclosed in the current strategy. Your firm's internal guidelines emphasize a structured approach to managing conflicts of interest. Option A. Immediately disclose the potential conflict of interest to your supervisor and follow the firm's established procedures for managing such situations, which may involve recusal from further decision-making on this matter. Option B. Inform your acquaintance of the situation and allow them to make their own decision on how to proceed, without involving your supervisor or firm. Option C. Proceed with the action that benefits your acquaintance, assuming it does not directly harm the client and that the personal gain is a separate matter from your professional duties. Option D. Make a unilateral decision based on your interpretation of the firm's guidelines, proceeding with the action if you believe it falls within acceptable parameters without further consultation. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the potential conflict of interest to your supervisor and follow the firm's established procedures for managing such situations, which may involve recusal from further decision-making on this matter. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate a situation where personal interests could potentially conflict with professional obligations and ethical standards. The core of the challenge lies in maintaining objectivity and integrity when faced with information that could benefit oneself or an associate, while also having a duty to act in the best interest of the client or employer. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all decisions are made impartially and in accordance with established professional conduct guidelines. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes transparency and adherence to the established decision-making framework. By seeking guidance from a supervisor and documenting the process, the professional demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and avoids any appearance of impropriety. This aligns with the principles of professional responsibility, which mandate acting with integrity, competence, and in the best interests of clients or stakeholders. Specifically, it upholds the duty to avoid conflicts of interest and to act with due care and diligence. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding without disclosure or seeking advice would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to a breach of trust, potential financial harm to the client or employer, and reputational damage. It violates the fundamental ethical obligation to disclose potential conflicts of interest and to act impartially. Another incorrect approach, such as making a unilateral decision based on personal interpretation of guidelines, risks misinterpreting complex ethical rules or company policies, leading to unintended consequences and a failure to meet professional standards. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for established protocols designed to ensure fairness and integrity. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework when faced with such dilemmas. This typically involves identifying the ethical issue, gathering relevant facts, considering all stakeholders, evaluating alternative courses of action against ethical principles and professional codes, consulting with appropriate parties, supervisors, ethics officers, making a decision, and documenting the process. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are well-reasoned, defensible, and aligned with professional and regulatory expectations. Question 2. Performance analysis shows a consistent decline in a team member's output over the last quarter, falling below established benchmarks. What is the most appropriate initial step to address this situation? Option A. Schedule a meeting with the team member to discuss the performance data, explore potential contributing factors, and collaboratively identify solutions. Option B. Immediately issue a formal warning to the team member, citing the performance data as evidence of unsatisfactory work. Option C. Conduct a peer review of the team members' work without their direct involvement to gather objective feedback on their performance. Option D. Reassign the team member to a less demanding role to mitigate the impact of their underperformance on critical projects. Correct answer is A. Schedule a meeting with the team member to discuss the performance data, explore potential contributing factors, and collaboratively identify solutions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in professional environments where performance data, while indicating a potential issue, is not definitive. The difficulty lies in balancing the need for timely intervention to address underperformance with the risk of making an unfair or premature judgment that could negatively impact an individual's career and morale. The professional challenge is to move beyond simply observing data to understanding its root causes and applying a structured, fair, and evidence-based decision-making process. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multi-stage process that prioritizes understanding and support before resorting to punitive measures. This aligns with best professional practices that emphasize fairness, due process, and employee development. It begins with a thorough investigation to identify the underlying reasons for the observed performance dip. This might involve discussions with the individual, reviewing their workload, assessing available resources, and considering external factors. Only after a comprehensive understanding is achieved should a performance improvement plan, PIP, be considered, which provides clear expectations, support, and a defined timeframe for improvement. This approach is ethically sound as it respects the individual's right to understand the concerns and to be given an opportunity to rectify them. It is also professionally prudent as it minimizes the risk of wrongful termination or demotivation, fostering a more positive and productive work environment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately initiate disciplinary action based solely on the initial performance data. This fails to acknowledge that performance metrics can be influenced by various factors beyond an individual's control or intent. Ethically, this is unfair as it bypasses the principle of natural justice, which requires an individual to be heard and given an opportunity to respond to allegations. Professionally, it can lead to a loss of trust, increased employee turnover, and potential legal challenges. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the performance data altogether, assuming it is a temporary anomaly. While some fluctuations are normal, neglecting consistent negative trends can lead to prolonged underperformance, impacting team productivity and project success. Ethically, this can be seen as a dereliction of duty by management to ensure adequate performance standards are met. Professionally, it can result in missed business opportunities and a decline in overall organizational effectiveness. A third incorrect approach is to make assumptions about the cause of the performance issue without seeking clarification or evidence. This can lead to misdiagnosis and the implementation of inappropriate solutions. Ethically, it is unfair to the individual to be judged based on unsubstantiated assumptions. Professionally, it wastes resources and time on ineffective interventions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with data collection and analysis, followed by hypothesis generation about the causes. This should then lead to information gathering through dialogue and investigation. Based on the gathered evidence, a reasoned judgment can be made, leading to appropriate actions, which may include support, training, or, if necessary, formal performance management. This iterative process ensures that decisions are informed, fair, and aligned with organizational goals and ethical principles. Question 3. The risk matrix shows a potential cybersecurity threat categorized as medium likelihood and high impact. Given current resource constraints, which of the following actions best reflects a proactive and responsible approach to managing this risk? Option A. Immediately halt all other projects and dedicate all available resources to addressing this medium likelihood, high-impact threat as if it were a critical, immediate crisis. Option B. Defer any significant action until the threat's likelihood or impact escalates to high on the matrix, focusing current resources on existing high-impact risks. Option C. Implement a minimal watch and wait strategy, assigning a junior analyst to monitor the threat without a defined escalation trigger or proactive mitigation steps. Option D. Develop and implement a targeted mitigation plan for this specific threat, allocating appropriate resources to reduce its likelihood or impact, and establish clear metrics for ongoing monitoring. The correct answer is D. Develop and implement a targeted mitigation plan for this specific threat, allocating appropriate resources to reduce its likelihood or impact, and establish clear metrics for ongoing monitoring. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in risk management where a potential threat, while not immediately critical, has a high likelihood of escalating. The professional must balance the immediate resource constraints with the potential for future significant impact. The challenge lies in making a proactive decision that justifies resource allocation for a problem that hasn't yet materialized into a high-impact event, potentially facing skepticism or pushback from stakeholders focused on current, more pressing issues. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive, data-driven decision informed by the risk matrix and a forward-looking assessment. It recognizes that the medium likelihood, high impact rating signifies a significant future threat that warrants immediate attention and mitigation planning. This aligns with best professional practice by prioritizing potential future harm and demonstrating responsible stewardship of company assets and reputation. It adheres to principles of prudent risk management, which advocate for addressing risks before they become critical, thereby minimizing potential losses and ensuring business continuity. This approach is ethically sound as it prioritizes the well-being of the organization and its stakeholders by preventing foreseeable damage. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to defer action due to the current medium impact rating, focusing solely on high-impact risks. This fails to acknowledge the high likelihood component, which, when combined with a significant potential impact, creates a substantial risk exposure. Ethically, this is a failure of due diligence and foresight, potentially leading to preventable harm. It also violates the principle of proactive risk management, which is a cornerstone of professional conduct in many regulated industries. Another incorrect approach is to allocate minimal resources to a watch and wait strategy without a defined trigger for escalation or a concrete mitigation plan. While acknowledging the risk, this approach is insufficient. It represents a failure to adequately address a foreseeable threat, potentially exposing the organization to reputational damage or financial loss if the risk materializes. This can be seen as a dereliction of professional duty to manage risks effectively. A third incorrect approach is to immediately escalate to the highest level of response without a clear justification beyond the current matrix rating, potentially overreacting and misallocating resources. While proactive, this lacks the nuanced judgment required. It may lead to inefficient resource deployment and could undermine confidence in the risk management process if future events do not fully materialize as predicted. This approach might also be seen as lacking in proportionality, a key ethical consideration in decision-making. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that integrates risk assessment with strategic planning. This involves 1. Understanding the full context of the risk matrix, considering both likelihood and impact. 2. Evaluating the potential consequences of inaction against the cost and feasibility of mitigation. 3. Developing a tiered response plan that scales with the evolving risk profile. 4. Communicating the rationale for decisions clearly to stakeholders, emphasizing the proactive nature of the chosen strategy. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating risk assessments and mitigation plans. Question 4. Analysis of the potential consequences of launching a new, complex derivative product on the firm's retail client base, considering its suitability and the firm's capacity to manage associated risks, requires a comprehensive evaluation. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations for responsible product development and client protection? Option A. Conducting a thorough assessment of the derivative's risk profile, potential impact on different client segments, and the firm's operational readiness to support it, including an evaluation of necessary updates to client suitability frameworks and disclosure documents. Option B. Relying on the product development team's internal risk assessment and assuming existing compliance procedures are sufficient without specific review for this new product. Option C. Prioritizing the projected revenue generation and market share gains from the new derivative, with a cursory review of its technical specifications. Option D. Focusing the assessment solely on the legal enforceability of the derivative contracts and the firm's ability to execute trades, without considering client suitability or broader market impact. The correct answer is C. Prioritizing the projected revenue generation and market share gains from the new derivative, with a cursory review of its technical specifications. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a firm's desire to innovate and expand its service offerings and the regulatory imperative to ensure that such expansion does not compromise client interests or market integrity. The introduction of a new, complex financial product requires a thorough understanding of its potential impact on various client segments, including those who may be less sophisticated or more vulnerable. The firm must balance the potential for increased revenue and market share against the risks of mis-selling, inadequate disclosure, and potential financial harm to clients. This necessitates a rigorous and objective impact assessment process that goes beyond a superficial review. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted impact assessment that systematically evaluates the new product's implications across all relevant dimensions. This includes a detailed analysis of the product's features, risks, and suitability for different client profiles. It requires engaging with various internal stakeholders, such as compliance, risk management, and sales teams, to gather diverse perspectives and identify potential blind spots. Furthermore, it necessitates considering the product's potential impact on market stability and the firm's overall risk appetite. This holistic and proactive approach aligns with the principles of treating customers fairly and maintaining market integrity, which are fundamental tenets of financial regulation. Specifically, under UK regulations and SISI guidelines, firms have a duty of care to their clients and are expected to conduct thorough due diligence before launching new products. This includes understanding the product's risks, ensuring appropriate controls are in place, and providing clear, fair, and not misleading information to clients. A robust impact assessment is a cornerstone of this due diligence. Incorrect approaches analysis, focusing solely on the potential profitability of the new product, while ignoring or downplaying associated risks and client suitability, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach prioritizes commercial gain over client welfare, violating the principle of treating customers fairly. It could lead to mis-selling, where clients are sold products that are not suitable for their needs or risk tolerance, resulting in financial losses and reputational damage for the firm. Such a failure would contravene regulatory requirements that mandate suitability assessments and responsible product governance. Adopting a superficial review that relies heavily on the product development team's assurances without independent validation or consideration of broader market implications is another critical failure. This approach lacks the necessary objectivity and diligence. It fails to identify potential conflicts of interest or unintended consequences, such as the product exacerbating market volatility or creating systemic risk. Regulators expect firms to have robust internal controls and independent oversight to mitigate such risks. Limiting the impact assessment to a review of existing compliance policies without considering how the new product might necessitate updates or new policies is also inadequate. Compliance policies are designed to address known risks. A new, complex product may introduce novel risks that require specific attention and tailored controls. A failure to adapt policies to new product introductions demonstrates a reactive rather than proactive approach to risk management, which is a breach of regulatory expectations for ongoing compliance and risk mitigation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, risk-based approach to impact assessment. This involves clearly defining the scope of the assessment, identifying all relevant stakeholders, and employing a range of analytical tools and methodologies. A critical step is to challenge assumptions and seek diverse perspectives to ensure a comprehensive understanding of potential impacts. The process should be iterative, allowing for adjustments based on findings. Professionals must prioritize client interests and regulatory compliance, ensuring that commercial objectives do not override these fundamental responsibilities. When in doubt, seeking guidance from compliance, legal, or senior management is essential. Question 5. The control framework reveals a situation where a senior manager is strongly advocating for a new product launch that appears to offer significant personal financial incentives to them, despite internal risk assessments indicating potential regulatory noncompliance and a high probability of client dissatisfaction. As a junior analyst who has identified these discrepancies, what is the most appropriate course of action to uphold professional integrity and regulatory compliance? Option A. Directly approach the senior manager with your findings, expressing your reservations and suggesting modifications to the product to mitigate the identified risks, hoping to resolve the issue collaboratively. Option B. Immediately escalate the concerns, supported by documented evidence from risk assessments and market analysis, to the firm's compliance department and internal audit team, requesting an independent review of the product launch and the senior manager's involvement. Option C. Proceed with the product launch as directed by the senior manager, assuming their experience and authority supersede your concerns, and focus on executing your assigned tasks efficiently. Option D. Discreetly voice your concerns to colleagues who might also be aware of the situation, hoping for collective action or support before formally reporting the issue. The correct answer is B. Immediately escalate the concerns, supported by documented evidence from risk assessments and market analysis, to the firm's compliance department and internal audit team, requesting an independent review of the product launch and the senior manager's involvement. Explanation. The control framework reveals a potential conflict of interest where a senior manager is advocating for a project that could personally benefit them, despite evidence suggesting it might not be the most prudent or compliant course of action for the firm. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing loyalty to a superior with the ethical and regulatory obligation to act in the best interest of the company and its clients. The manager must navigate the delicate situation of questioning a senior leader's judgment without appearing insubordinate, while simultaneously upholding professional integrity and adherence to the firm's code of conduct and relevant regulatory guidelines. The correct approach, which involves seeking clarification and presenting objective, data-driven concerns to relevant oversight bodies or a compliance department, represents best professional practice. This aligns with regulatory expectations that employees must escalate potential compliance breaches or conflicts of interest. It demonstrates a commitment to transparency, accountability, and the firm's adherence to its control framework. By engaging with established channels, the professional ensures that concerns are addressed through appropriate governance mechanisms, protecting the firm from potential regulatory penalties and reputational damage. This proactive and structured escalation is ethically sound, as it prioritizes the integrity of the firm's operations and client interests over personal or hierarchical pressures. An incorrect approach of directly confronting the senior manager without documented evidence or a clear escalation path risks being perceived as a personal attack, potentially leading to retaliation and silencing of legitimate concerns. This fails to leverage the firm's internal control mechanisms and could result in the issue being dismissed or mishandled. Another incorrect approach, that of passively agreeing with the senior manager to avoid conflict, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This passive compliance can lead to the firm engaging in non-compliant activities, exposing it to severe penalties, and violating the professional's duty to act with integrity and due diligence. It also undermines the very purpose of a control framework, which is to prevent such occurrences. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve, first, objectively assessing the situation and gathering all relevant facts and evidence. Second, identifying potential conflicts of interest and regulatory breaches. Third, consulting the firm's code of conduct, policies, and relevant regulatory guidelines. Fourth, if concerns persist, discreetly seeking advice from a trusted mentor, compliance officer, or legal counsel. Fifth, escalating the issue through the appropriate internal channels, providing clear, factual, and objective information. Finally, documenting all communications and actions taken. Question 6. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a new digital asset trading platform is nearing completion. Before its full launch, a comprehensive impact assessment is required to identify and mitigate potential risks. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations and professional best practices for such an assessment? Option A. Conduct a thorough impact assessment covering operational, financial, legal, regulatory, and reputational dimensions, developing mitigation strategies for identified risks before proceeding with the launch. Option B. Focus exclusively on the potential financial benefits and market share gains of the new platform, downplaying or ignoring potential negative operational or reputational consequences. Option C. Proceed with the launch after a preliminary operational assessment, assuming that other impacts will be manageable or will resolve themselves post-launch. Option D. Rely on anecdotal evidence and the experience of a few senior individuals, without a structured, documented assessment process to gauge potential impacts. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough impact assessment covering operational, financial, legal, regulatory, and reputational dimensions, developing mitigation strategies for identified risks before proceeding with the launch. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the need for rapid deployment of a new service and the imperative to thoroughly assess potential impacts. The pressure to innovate and gain market advantage can lead to a temptation to bypass or abbreviate crucial impact assessment steps. This requires careful judgment to balance business objectives with regulatory compliance and ethical considerations, ensuring that potential harm to clients, the firm, and the market is identified and mitigated before launch. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that considers all relevant dimensions: operational, financial, legal, regulatory, and reputational. This aligns with best professional practice and regulatory expectations, which mandate a proactive and thorough understanding of how new initiatives might affect stakeholders and the broader financial ecosystem. Specifically, it adheres to principles of sound risk management, which require identifying, assessing, and controlling risks before they materialize. This approach ensures that potential adverse consequences are understood and addressed, thereby safeguarding client interests, maintaining market integrity, and upholding the firm's reputation. It also demonstrates a commitment to responsible innovation, a key tenet in regulated industries. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to proceed with the launch based solely on a preliminary operational assessment, assuming that other impacts will be manageable or will resolve themselves post-launch. This fails to meet regulatory requirements for robust risk management and impact analysis. It represents an ethical failure by prioritizing speed over client protection and market stability, potentially exposing clients to unforeseen risks and damaging the firm's reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to focus exclusively on the financial benefits and market share gains, downplaying or ignoring potential negative operational or reputational consequences. This approach is ethically flawed as it prioritizes profit over responsibility and demonstrates a disregard for the firm's broader obligations. It also likely violates regulatory principles that require a holistic view of risk and impact, not just those that are financially advantageous. A third incorrect approach would be to rely on anecdotal evidence or the experience of a few senior individuals without a structured, documented assessment process. This lacks the rigor expected in a regulated environment and can lead to blind spots. It is professionally unsound because it bypasses established procedures designed to ensure thoroughness and objectivity, increasing the likelihood of overlooking critical risks and failing to comply with regulatory mandates for due diligence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, risk-based approach to impact assessment. This involves clearly defining the scope of the assessment, identifying all potential stakeholders and their interests, systematically evaluating risks across various categories: operational, financial, legal, regulatory, reputational, and developing appropriate mitigation strategies. Decision-making should be guided by a commitment to compliance, ethical conduct, and the long-term sustainability of the business and the market. When faced with pressure to expedite, professionals must advocate for the necessary time and resources to conduct a thorough assessment, escalating concerns if insufficient time or resources are allocated. Question 7. Research into the potential market reception and operational feasibility of a new product has been conducted, but a comprehensive assessment of its broader societal and environmental impacts has been deferred to a later stage due to time constraints and pressure to launch quickly. What is the most professionally responsible approach to proceed? Option A. Halt the launch and conduct a full impact assessment, including societal and environmental considerations, before proceeding. Option B. Proceed with the launch as planned, incorporating a post-launch monitoring system to address any emergent issues. Option C. Proceed with the launch but allocate a dedicated team to immediately begin a retrospective impact assessment and develop mitigation plans. Option D. Delegate the responsibility for assessing societal and environmental impacts to the marketing team, who are best positioned to gauge public sentiment. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the launch as planned, incorporating a post-launch monitoring system to address any emergent issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a new product launch with the potential long-term and possibly unforeseen negative consequences on the company's reputation and market position. The pressure to innovate and capture market share can lead to shortcuts in due diligence, which is where impact assessment becomes critical. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the potential benefits of rapid deployment are not outweighed by significant risks that could have been identified and mitigated. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough and systematic evaluation of potential impacts before committing to a significant strategic decision. This aligns with principles of responsible innovation and corporate governance, which mandate that organizations consider the broader implications of their actions. Specifically, a comprehensive impact assessment, encompassing market, operational, and reputational factors, allows for proactive risk management. By identifying potential negative outcomes early, the company can develop mitigation strategies, adjust the product's features, or even reconsider the launch altogether, thereby safeguarding its long-term viability and stakeholder interests. This proactive stance is often implicitly or explicitly supported by regulatory expectations around due diligence and risk management frameworks, even if not tied to a specific piece of legislation in this context. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the speed of market entry, without adequate consideration of potential negative impacts, fails to uphold professional responsibility. This could lead to regulatory scrutiny if the product causes harm or misleads consumers, even if not directly violating a specific law at the outset. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for customer welfare and the company's broader societal impact. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few key stakeholders, rather than a structured assessment, is also professionally unsound. This approach is prone to bias and overlooks systemic risks. It fails to provide a robust basis for decision-making and can result in significant unforeseen problems that damage the company's reputation and financial standing. Such a lack of diligence could be viewed as a failure to exercise reasonable care, a fundamental ethical and professional obligation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach to risk and impact assessment. This begins with clearly defining the scope of the assessment and identifying all relevant stakeholders. It then involves gathering data from diverse sources, analyzing potential positive and negative outcomes across various dimensions, e.g., financial, operational, reputational, ethical, legal, and evaluating the likelihood and severity of these outcomes. Based on this analysis, mitigation strategies should be developed, and a clear recommendation should be formulated, which may include proceeding with the launch, modifying the plan, or abandoning the initiative. This process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with the organization's long-term strategic goals and ethical commitments. Question 8. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a new digital wealth management platform is nearing its planned launch date. The product team is eager to proceed to capture market share, suggesting that a full impact assessment can be streamlined by focusing primarily on immediate financial risks and assuming existing compliance frameworks are adequate for the new features. Which approach to the impact assessment best upholds professional and regulatory standards? Option A. Conduct a superficial impact assessment, relying on the assumption that the development team's internal checks are sufficient, and postpone a thorough evaluation of potential risks until post-launch monitoring reveals any issues. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment that systematically identifies and evaluates potential financial, operational, reputational, legal, and regulatory consequences, including specific considerations for data privacy, system integrity, and client confidentiality, before launch. Option C. Prioritize the impact assessment on immediate financial risks and assume that existing compliance frameworks are sufficient to cover the new platform's features, deferring a detailed review of other potential impacts until after the product is live. Option D. Streamline the impact assessment by focusing solely on the potential financial gains and market share expansion, with a minimal review of potential negative consequences. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment that systematically identifies and evaluates potential financial, operational, reputational, legal, and regulatory consequences, including specific considerations for data privacy, system integrity, and client confidentiality, before launch. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between business objectives, speed to market, and robust risk management. The pressure to launch a new product quickly can lead to shortcuts in the impact assessment process, potentially overlooking critical risks that could have significant financial, reputational, or regulatory consequences. The challenge lies in balancing the need for agility with the imperative to conduct thorough due diligence. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive impact assessment that prioritizes identifying and evaluating potential negative consequences across all relevant domains: financial, operational, reputational, legal, and regulatory. This aligns with best professional practice and regulatory expectations for responsible product development and launch. Specifically, it ensures that the organization understands the full spectrum of risks before committing resources and exposing itself to potential harm. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining client trust, adhering to industry standards, and avoiding regulatory sanctions. The emphasis on identifying potential impacts on data privacy, system integrity, and client confidentiality directly addresses key regulatory concerns often found in financial services assessments. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach might involve focusing solely on the financial implications of a product launch, neglecting operational, reputational, or regulatory risks. This is a failure because it provides an incomplete picture of the potential downsides, leading to underestimation of the overall risk exposure. Regulatory frameworks often mandate consideration of a broader range of impacts beyond just financial loss. Another incorrect approach could be to defer the detailed impact assessment until after the product has been launched, relying on post-launch monitoring to identify issues. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a reactive rather than proactive risk management posture, which is contrary to principles of sound governance and consumer protection. Such an approach significantly increases the likelihood of unforeseen and potentially severe negative outcomes. A third incorrect approach might be to conduct a superficial assessment, assuming that existing controls are sufficient without rigorous testing or validation. This approach fails to acknowledge the unique risks associated with a new product and can lead to a false sense of security. It overlooks the possibility that new functionalities or integrations might introduce novel vulnerabilities or compliance gaps, which regulators expect to be thoroughly investigated. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach impact assessments by first defining the scope and objectives clearly. They should then adopt a structured methodology that systematically identifies potential risks and their associated impacts. This involves engaging relevant stakeholders from different departments, e.g., legal, compliance, IT, operations, marketing, to gather diverse perspectives. The assessment should quantify or qualitatively describe the potential severity and likelihood of each impact. Crucially, the findings should inform decision-making regarding product development, mitigation strategies, and the go/no-go decision for launch. A continuous review and update process for the impact assessment should be embedded throughout the product lifecycle. Question 9. Benchmark analysis indicates that a new regulatory framework is set to be implemented within the next 6 months, impacting how financial advisory firms manage client data and reporting. Which of the following approaches would best ensure the firm's readiness and compliance while minimizing disruption to client services? Option A. Rely solely on the legal department to interpret the regulation and provide a list of required changes without further operational or technical review. Option B. Implement broad, sweeping changes across all client-facing systems immediately, assuming this will cover all potential requirements of the new framework. Option C. Conduct a thorough, cross-departmental impact assessment involving legal, compliance, IT, and business operations to identify all potential changes required, develop mitigation strategies, and plan for phased implementation. Option D. Wait for the regulation to be fully enacted and observe how competitors adapt their practices before initiating any internal changes. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough, cross-departmental impact assessment involving legal, compliance, IT, and business operations to identify all potential changes required, develop mitigation strategies, and plan for phased implementation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent uncertainty in predicting the full impact of a new regulatory change on a financial firm's operations and client services. The firm must balance the need for proactive adaptation with the risk of overinvesting in unnecessary changes or, conversely, underpreparing and facing noncompliance. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the scope, magnitude, and timeline of the impact, requiring a nuanced understanding of both the regulation and the firm's internal processes. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted impact assessment that considers both direct and indirect consequences. This includes evaluating operational changes, technological requirements, data management, client communication strategies, and potential financial implications. By engaging relevant stakeholders across departments and conducting thorough scenario planning, the firm can develop a robust understanding of the regulatory impact. This aligns with best professional practice by ensuring a systematic and informed response, minimizing the risk of oversight and promoting efficient resource allocation. Ethically, it demonstrates a commitment to compliance and client well-being by proactively addressing potential disruptions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on the legal department's interpretation of the regulation. This fails to acknowledge that legal interpretation, while crucial, may not fully capture the practical operational, technological, or client-facing implications. This can lead to an incomplete impact assessment, potentially missing critical areas that require attention, thus risking regulatory breaches and operational inefficiencies. Another incorrect approach is to implement changes based on anecdotal evidence or the actions of competitors without a formal assessment. This is professionally unsound as it lacks a data-driven basis and can lead to misallocation of resources, implementing unnecessary changes, or failing to address unique aspects of the firm's own operations. It also risks noncompliance if competitors' actions are not fully aligned with the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the firm. A third incorrect approach is to delay any significant action until the regulation is fully implemented and enforcement begins. This is a high-risk strategy that can result in significant disruption, penalties, and reputational damage. It demonstrates a lack of proactive risk management and a failure to uphold professional responsibility in ensuring timely compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, risk-based approach to impact assessment. This involves 1. Clearly defining the scope of the assessment based on the regulatory change. 2. Identifying all relevant internal and external stakeholders. 3. Gathering information from multiple sources, including legal, compliance, IT, operations, and business units. 4. Developing a framework for analyzing potential impacts across different dimensions: operational, financial, technological, client. 5. Prioritizing identified impacts based on severity and likelihood. 6. Developing mitigation and implementation plans. 7. Regularly reviewing and updating the assessment as new information becomes available. This systematic process ensures a thorough and defensible approach to regulatory change management. Question 10. Which approach would be most appropriate for a financial advisor when a client expresses a strong preference for a specific investment product that appears to be misaligned with their stated financial goals and risk profile, and where alternative, more suitable options exist? Option A. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their preference. Explore the potential risks and benefits of their chosen product in relation to their goals and present alternative, more suitable investment options with a clear explanation of why they are recommended. Option B. Politely decline to advise on the client's preferred investment and insist that the client only consider the advisor's pre-selected, more suitable options without further explanation. Option C. Immediately proceed with the client's preferred investment, assuming the client is fully informed and has the ultimate authority over their investment decisions to maintain client satisfaction. Option D. Advise the client that their preferred investment is unsuitable and suggest they seek advice from another professional who may be more willing to accommodate their request. The correct answer is A. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their preference. Explore the potential risks and benefits of their chosen product in relation to their goals, and present alternative, more suitable investment options with a clear explanation of why they are recommended. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when that preference might lead to suboptimal outcomes or regulatory breaches. The advisor must navigate the complexities of client autonomy versus professional responsibility, ensuring that any recommendation is both compliant and genuinely beneficial. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing demands without compromising ethical standards or regulatory obligations. The correct approach represents best professional practice, because it prioritizes a thorough understanding of the client's underlying needs and objectives before making any recommendations. This involves engaging in a detailed fact-finding process to uncover the true motivations behind the client's stated preference. By exploring alternatives and explaining their respective merits and drawbacks, the advisor fulfills their duty to provide informed advice. This aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate suitability and best execution, ensuring that recommendations are appropriate for the client's circumstances and risk tolerance. It also upholds ethical principles of transparency and client welfare. An incorrect approach that solely focuses on fulfilling the client's stated preference without due diligence would fail to meet the advisor's professional obligations. This could lead to a recommendation that is unsuitable, potentially exposing the client to undue risk or suboptimal returns, thereby violating suitability rules. Another incorrect approach that dismisses the client's preference outright without attempting to understand the rationale behind it would be disrespectful of client autonomy and could damage the professional relationship, potentially leading to complaints or loss of business. Furthermore, failing to explore and explain alternatives, even if the client's initial preference seems viable, could be seen as a lack of diligence and a failure to provide comprehensive advice, which is often a regulatory expectation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, actively listen and seek to understand the client's stated request and underlying motivations. Second, conduct a comprehensive assessment of the client's financial situation, objectives, risk tolerance, and knowledge. Third, identify and evaluate suitable options that align with the client's profile, considering regulatory requirements and best practices. Fourth, clearly communicate the pros and cons of each option, including the client's preferred option, in a way that the client can understand. Fifth, make a reasoned recommendation based on the assessment and client discussion, ensuring it is in the client's best interest and compliant with all applicable regulations. Finally, document the entire process and the rationale for the final decision. Question 11. The review process indicates that a financial advisor has been approached by a long-standing client who has expressed a strong desire to invest in a specific, high-risk, speculative product. The advisor knows this product is not aligned with the client's stated moderate risk tolerance and long-term retirement goals, but it offers a significantly higher commission than other, more suitable investment options. The client is insistent, stating they have researched it and are confident in its potential. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor? Option A. Thoroughly explain to the client the risks associated with the product, how it conflicts with their stated financial goals and risk tolerance, and recommend alternative investments that are more suitable, while still respecting the client's ultimate decision if they choose to proceed after full disclosure. Option B. Invest the client's funds in the requested high-risk product without further discussion, assuming the client's research is sufficient and they are aware of the potential outcomes. Option C. Recommend a different, slightly less risky but still commission-generating product that is closer to the client's stated goals, as a compromise to satisfy both the client's desire for a higher return and the advisor's need for a reasonable commission. Option D. Proceed with the client's requested investment in the high-risk product, as the client has explicitly requested it and is insistent, and the advisor has a duty to follow client instructions. The correct answer is A. Thoroughly explain to the client the risks associated with the product, how it conflicts with their stated financial goals and risk tolerance, and recommend alternative investments that are more suitable, while still respecting the client's ultimate decision if they choose to proceed after full disclosure. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest. The advisor must navigate the potential for misinterpretation of the client's instructions, the risk of recommending unsuitable products, and the obligation to provide objective, unbiased advice. The pressure to meet sales targets or maintain client relationships can further complicate this judgment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing the client's best interests above all else, aligning with the core principles of fiduciary duty and client-centric advice. This involves a thorough understanding of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and objectives, followed by a recommendation of products that genuinely meet those needs, even if they are not the highest commission-generating option. This approach upholds regulatory requirements for suitability and ethical conduct, ensuring transparency and trust. Incorrect approach is analysis, recommending the product that offers the highest commission, despite it not being the most suitable for the client's stated goals, represents a clear breach of fiduciary duty and regulatory requirements for suitability. This prioritizes the advisor's personal gain over the client's welfare, leading to potential financial harm for the client and regulatory sanctions for the advisor. Proceeding with the client's initial request without further investigation, even if the client insists, is also professionally unacceptable. This approach fails to exercise due diligence and fulfill the advisor's responsibility to ensure the client fully understands the implications of their choices and that the chosen product aligns with their overall financial well-being. It can lead to unsuitable investments and a failure to meet regulatory obligations. Suggesting a slightly different but still commission-heavy product that is marginally more aligned with the client's stated goals, but still not the optimal choice, is a form of ethical shading. While it appears to make a concession, it still falls short of the fiduciary standard by not presenting the truly best option and potentially still prioritizing commission over the client's absolute best interest. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive client needs analysis. This should be followed by an objective assessment of available products, considering suitability, risk, return, and costs. Any recommendation must be clearly explained to the client, including potential downsides and alternatives. If a client's request conflicts with their best interests or regulatory guidelines, the professional must educate the client and guide them towards a more appropriate solution, documenting all discussions and decisions. Question 12. The analysis reveals that a financial advisor, acting on behalf of a UK-based investment firm, has been approached by a long-standing client to facilitate a significant transfer of funds from an overseas account. The client has provided documentation that appears legitimate, but the advisor notes several inconsistencies in the transaction details and the client's explanation for the sudden, large influx of capital. The advisor suspects these funds may be linked to illicit activities, but the client is a high net worth individual who generates substantial revenue for the firm. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor in this situation, adhering strictly to UK regulatory frameworks and professional conduct guidelines? Option A. Conduct a thorough internal investigation into the source of the funds, gathering additional evidence before deciding whether to report. Option B. Immediately report the suspicious transaction to the National Crime Agency, NCA, via a Suspicious Activity Report (SAR), without informing the client. Option C. Advise the client that the transaction cannot proceed due to the inconsistencies and suggest they provide further clarification before any action is taken. Option D. Discuss the advisor's suspicions directly with the client to understand their perspective and reassure them that the firm is conducting due diligence. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the suspicious transaction to the National Crime Agency, NCA, via a Suspicious Activity Report (SAR), without informing the client. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between client confidentiality and the regulatory obligation to report suspicious activities. A financial advisor must navigate the delicate balance of maintaining client trust while adhering to anti-money laundering (AML) regulations. The pressure to protect client information can be significant, but failure to report can have severe legal and reputational consequences for both the individual and the firm. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the suspicious transaction to the relevant authority, such as the National Crime Agency, NCA in the UK, without tipping off the client. This aligns with the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, POCA, and the Money Laundering Regulations 2017, which mandate reporting of suspicious activity. This action upholds the professional duty to combat financial crime and protect the integrity of the financial system, demonstrating best professional practice by prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical responsibility over potential client dissatisfaction. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to ignore the suspicious activity due to a desire to avoid client confrontation or potential loss of business. This directly violates the reporting obligations under POCA and the Money Laundering Regulations 2017, constituting a serious regulatory and ethical failure. It exposes the advisor and their firm to significant penalties and undermines the collective effort to combat financial crime. Another incorrect approach is to discuss the suspicion with the client before reporting. This is known as tipping off and is a criminal offense under POCA. It compromises the integrity of any subsequent investigation and allows potential criminals to evade detection, representing a severe breach of regulatory requirements and professional ethics. A third incorrect approach is to conduct an independent investigation into the source of funds without reporting. While due diligence is important, the primary regulatory obligation upon forming a suspicion is to report it to the relevant authorities. Delaying or substituting reporting with an internal investigation can be seen as an attempt to circumvent regulatory requirements and may be insufficient to meet the legal standard for reporting suspicious activity. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should follow a clear decision-making framework. First, identify the potential red flags and assess the level of suspicion based on established AML guidelines and internal firm policies. Second, consult internal compliance procedures and, if necessary, seek guidance from the firm's compliance officer. Third, if suspicion remains, proceed with the mandatory reporting to the designated authority promptly and discreetly, ensuring no tipping off occurs. Finally, document all actions taken and decisions made meticulously. This structured approach ensures compliance, ethical conduct, and effective risk management. Question 13. The control framework reveals that a client who has expressed a strong preference for a particular high-risk, complex investment product is seeking advice. The firm's initial assessment suggests this product is not suitable for the client's stated financial goals and risk tolerance. The client insists on proceeding with this specific product, citing a tip from a friend. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor? Option A. Immediately proceed with the client's preferred product as requested, as the client is ultimately responsible for their investment decisions. Option B. Advise the client that their preference is unacceptable and refuse to discuss the product further, recommending they seek advice elsewhere. Option C. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment. Clearly explain the risks and unsuitability of the preferred product to the client, present suitable alternative options, and document all discussions in the client's final decision. Option D. Investigate the source of the client's tip to verify its credibility before providing any advice on the product. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment. Clearly explain the risks and unsuitability of the preferred product to the client, present suitable alternative options, and document all discussions and the client's final decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the firm's regulatory obligations and ethical duties. The firm must navigate the client's desire for a specific, potentially unsuitable investment product while upholding its fiduciary responsibilities and adhering to the principles of suitability and client best interests, as mandated by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, in the UK. The core of the challenge lies in balancing client autonomy with the professional's duty to protect the client from potential harm arising from inappropriate financial advice or product recommendations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the client's best interests and adheres strictly to regulatory requirements. By conducting a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, objectives, risk tolerance, and knowledge, the firm ensures that any recommendation is suitable. This aligns with the FCA's principles for businesses, particularly Principle 2, Customers' Interests, and Principle 3, Fitness and Propriety, which require firms to act honestly, fairly, and professionally in accordance with the best interests of their clients. Furthermore, it upholds the principles of the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment (SISI) Code of Conduct, which emphasizes integrity, competence, and acting in the client's best interests. Documenting the entire process, including the client's rationale for their preference and the firm's advice, is crucial for demonstrating compliance and providing a defense against potential future complaints. An incorrect approach that involves immediately proceeding with the client's preferred product without adequate due diligence fails to meet the suitability requirements. This would be a direct breach of FCA regulations, specifically the rules around providing investment advice and making recommendations. Demonstrates a lack of professional integrity and a disregard for the client's financial well-being, potentially leading to significant financial losses for the client and regulatory sanctions for the firm. Ethically, it violates the trust placed in the professional by the client. Another incorrect approach, which involves dismissing the client's preference outright without attempting to understand their reasoning or explore alternatives, could be perceived as patronizing and may damage the client relationship. While the firm has a duty to advise against unsuitable products, a complete dismissal without exploration can be seen as a failure to engage constructively with the client's stated desires, potentially leading to a breakdown in communication and trust. This approach, while perhaps stemming from a desire to protect the client, lacks the nuanced communication and client-centric approach expected under FCA and CISI guidelines. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured, client-focused approach. First, actively listen to and understand the client's stated preferences and the underlying reasons for them. Second, conduct a comprehensive fact-find to gather all necessary information about the client's financial circumstances, objectives, risk appetite, and knowledge. Third, evaluate the suitability of the client's preferred product against this information and regulatory requirements. Fourth, clearly and transparently explain the findings, including any concerns about suitability and present alternative suitable options. Fifth, document all discussions, advice given, and the client's final decision, ensuring the client understands the implications. This process ensures that advice is both compliant and client-centric, fostering trust and mitigating risk. Question 14. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a long-standing client, who has always provided information promptly in the past, is now expressing significant reluctance to provide detailed documentation regarding the source of funds for a substantial new investment, citing privacy concerns and a desire to expedite the process. The firm's internal policies and the money laundering, terrorist financing and transfer of funds, information on the payer, Regulations 2017 require enhanced due diligence in such circumstances. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firm? Option A. Escalate the matter internally to the compliance department for guidance, and then engage with the client to explain the regulatory necessity for the requested information, emphasizing the firm's commitment to compliance and seeking their cooperation to find a mutually acceptable solution. Option B. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, assuming their past compliance history is sufficient to override current concerns. Option C. Immediately cease all dealings with the client and file a suspicious activity report with the relevant authorities without further discussion or internal consultation. Option D. Inform the client that their request cannot be accommodated due to their unwillingness to provide information, and terminate the relationship without further explanation. The correct answer is A. Escalate the matter internally to the compliance department for guidance, and then engage with the client to explain the regulatory necessity for the requested information, emphasizing the firm's commitment to compliance and seeking their cooperation to find a mutually acceptable solution. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's explicit instructions and the firm's ethical and regulatory obligations. The client's desire to minimize disclosure, while understandable from their perspective, directly clashes with the firm's duty to conduct thorough due diligence and report suspicious activities as mandated by anti-money laundering (AML) regulations. The firm must navigate this tension without jeopardizing the client relationship or breaching its legal and ethical responsibilities. The challenge lies in balancing client service with regulatory compliance, requiring careful judgment and a robust understanding of the applicable legal framework. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted strategy that prioritizes regulatory compliance while attempting to maintain a constructive client dialogue. This approach aligns with the principles of professional conduct and AML regulations, which require firms to understand their clients and the source of their funds. By escalating the issue internally and seeking guidance from compliance, the firm demonstrates adherence to its internal policies and regulatory requirements. Simultaneously, engaging with the client to explain the regulatory necessity for further information, rather than outright refusing service, represents best professional practice. This approach allows for potential resolution through client cooperation, thereby fulfilling both compliance and client relationship objectives. The regulatory justification stems from the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, POCA, and the Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing and Transfer of Funds, Information on the Payer Regulations 2017, which mandate customer due diligence, CDD, and the reporting of suspicious activity. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately ceasing all engagement with the client and reporting them for suspicious activity without further internal consultation or client communication. This is a failure to follow established internal escalation procedures and a premature judgment of suspicion. While reporting is a critical obligation, it should be based on a thorough assessment and internal consensus, not an immediate reaction to a client's reluctance to provide information. This approach risks alienating a client unnecessarily and could lead to a missed opportunity to resolve the information gap through dialogue. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the transaction or engagement without obtaining the necessary information, thereby disregarding the client's reluctance. This directly violates AML regulations, specifically the CDD requirements. It exposes the firm to significant regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and potential complicity in financial crime. This approach prioritizes expediency over compliance and ethical responsibility. A third incorrect approach is to simply refuse the client's business without providing a clear, regulatory-based explanation. While terminating a relationship is sometimes necessary, doing so without explaining the underlying compliance reasons can be perceived as unprofessional and may not fully discharge the firm's duty to educate clients on regulatory expectations. It also misses the opportunity to potentially resolve the issue through further discussion. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should employ a structured decision-making process. First, identify the core conflict between client request and regulatory obligation. Second, consult internal policies and relevant regulations to understand the firm's duties and the client's rights. Third, escalate the issue internally to the compliance department or senior management for guidance and a unified approach. Fourth, engage with the client in a professional and transparent manner, explaining the regulatory requirements and the reasons for seeking additional information. Fifth, document all communications and decisions thoroughly. If the client remains uncooperative and the regulatory risk is significant, then consider appropriate actions, including potential termination of the relationship and reporting, in accordance with established procedures. Question 15. During the evaluation of a new client onboarding process, a financial advisor identifies that certain demographic and behavioral data collected during initial interactions could be valuable for refining service offerings and identifying potential cross-selling opportunities. The advisor considers using this data to improve the firm's understanding of client needs and to tailor future communications. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and compliant course of action? Option A. Share the collected demographic and behavioral data after basic anonymization with external marketing analytics firms to gain broader market insights, assuming this will indirectly benefit clients through improved service offerings. Option B. Utilize the collected demographic and behavioral data for internal service improvement and business development without seeking further consent or anonymizing it, as this is standard practice for enhancing client relationships. Option C. Obtain explicit, informed consent from clients to use their anonymized data for service improvement and internal business development purposes, ensuring that the anonymization process is robust and prevents re-identification. Option D. Proceed with using the collected demographic and behavioral data for internal analysis and targeted marketing, as this data was gathered during the client onboarding process and is therefore implicitly available for business use. The correct answer is C. Obtain explicit, informed consent from clients to use their anonymized data for service improvement and internal business development purposes, ensuring that the anonymization process is robust and prevents re-identification. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to data privacy and client confidentiality, core tenets within the financial services industry, particularly under UK regulations and SISI guidelines. The challenge lies in balancing the need to leverage client data for service improvement and business development, with the absolute requirement to protect sensitive information and adhere to legal obligations. A professional must exercise careful judgment to ensure all actions are compliant, ethical, and maintain client trust. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes explicit client consent and anonymization before utilizing any data for secondary purposes. This aligns directly with the principles of the UK GDPR, specifically the lawful basis for processing consent, data minimization, and purpose limitation. Anonymizing data ensures that individuals cannot be identified, thereby safeguarding privacy and preventing breaches of confidentiality. This proactive stance on data protection demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, building long-term client relationships based on trust. An incorrect approach that involves using client data for internal analysis without explicit consent or anonymization fails to uphold the lawful basis for processing data. This constitutes a direct breach of the UK GDPR, potentially leading to significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Furthermore, it violates the SISI ethical code regarding client confidentiality and acting in the best interests of clients. Another incorrect approach, which involves sharing anonymized data with third-party marketing firms without clear contractual safeguards or further consent, introduces an unacceptable level of risk. While the data may be anonymized, the potential for re-identification or misuse by a third party remains a concern. This approach neglects the principle of accountability under the UK GDPR and could be seen as a failure to adequately protect client data, even if indirectly. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with identifying the specific data involved and its sensitivity. Next, determine the intended purpose for using this data. Crucially, assess the legal and ethical requirements governing that data and purpose, referencing relevant regulations like the UK GDPR and professional body guidelines, e.g., SISI. Always seek the least intrusive method that achieves the objective. If data use is contemplated beyond the original purpose for which it was collected, obtaining explicit, informed consent is paramount. Where consent is not feasible or appropriate, robust anonymization techniques must be employed, with ongoing vigilance to prevent re-identification. Documenting all decisions and the rationale behind them is essential for accountability and auditability. Question 16. Compliance review shows that a client has requested advice on a complex financial arrangement designed to significantly reduce their tax liability. The client asserts that the arrangement is fully compliant with all tax laws and has provided documentation to support their claim. However, the proposed structure appears to rely on a novel interpretation of certain tax provisions and lacks clear economic substance beyond the tax benefit. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional and regulatory obligations in this scenario? Option A. Proceed with the client's proposed arrangement based on their assurance of legality, assuming their interpretation of the tax laws is correct and sufficient. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed arrangement, scrutinizing its economic substance, alignment with legislative intent, and potential for misinterpretation of tax laws, while maintaining open communication with the client regarding any concerns. Option C. Implement the proposed arrangement as requested by the client, focusing on the tax savings achieved, and only address compliance issues if they are explicitly raised by tax authorities. Option D. Advise the client that the firm cannot assist with arrangements that appear to exploit loopholes or rely on aggressive interpretations of tax law, without conducting a detailed analysis of the specific proposal. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed arrangement, scrutinizing its economic substance, alignment with legislative intent, and potential for misinterpretation of tax laws, while maintaining open communication with the client regarding any concerns. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's desire for aggressive tax planning and the firm's obligation to adhere to regulatory requirements and ethical standards. The challenge lies in balancing client service with the imperative to avoid facilitating tax evasion or aggressive tax avoidance schemes that could be deemed non-compliant. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate tax planning and arrangements that cross the line into non-compliance, potentially exposing both the client and the firm to significant risks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the proposed transaction against relevant tax legislation and guidance. This includes scrutinizing the economic substance of the transaction, ensuring it aligns with the stated business purpose, and verifying that it does not exploit loopholes or create artificial tax advantages. This approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes compliance with the law and ethical conduct. It demonstrates a commitment to providing advice that is both legally sound and ethically responsible, thereby protecting the firm's reputation and mitigating risks for both the client and the firm. Adherence to professional standards, such as those outlined by the relevant professional accounting or legal bodies, is paramount. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the transaction based solely on the client's assertion that it is legal, without independent verification. This fails to uphold the professional duty of due diligence and could lead to facilitating noncompliance. It represents an ethical failure to act with integrity and professional skepticism. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request outright without a proper assessment, potentially damaging the client relationship and missing an opportunity to provide legitimate, compliant advice. While caution is necessary, a complete refusal without due diligence might be seen as a failure to adequately serve the client within ethical boundaries. A third incorrect approach is to adopt a see no evil, hear no evil stance, where the firm is aware of potential issues but chooses to ignore them, relying on the client's assurances. This is a clear ethical and regulatory failure, as it can be construed as complicity in non-compliance or even tax evasion. It breaches the duty to act with professional competence and due care. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach. This involves understanding the client's objectives, assessing the potential tax implications of the proposed transaction, and critically evaluating the transaction's compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. If there is any doubt about the legality or ethicality of a proposed arrangement, professionals should seek further clarification, conduct more in-depth research, or decline to act if the risks of non-compliance are too high. Open communication with the client about the firm's concerns and the rationale behind any recommendations is also crucial. Question 17. The efficiency study reveals a significant disparity in the time taken by different teams to process client onboarding documentation, with some teams consistently taking longer than others. Which of the following actions is the most appropriate initial response to address this discrepancy? Option A. Implement mandatory overtime for all teams to expedite the overall processing of client documentation. Option B. Introduce a new, more complex software system for all teams to standardize the onboarding process. Option C. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis to understand the specific factors contributing to the longer processing times in certain teams. Option D. Immediately reassign a higher volume of client onboarding tasks to the faster-performing teams to balance the workload. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis to understand the specific factors contributing to the longer processing times in certain teams. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a significant disparity in the time taken by different teams to process client onboarding documentation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts client satisfaction, operational costs, and potentially regulatory compliance timelines. The pressure to improve efficiency must be balanced against the need to maintain accuracy and adhere to established procedures, which are often dictated by regulatory frameworks. The correct approach, which involves a root cause analysis of the processing delays, represents best professional practice. This method aligns with the principles of continuous improvement and operational excellence, often emphasized in professional development and organizational guidelines. It allows for the identification of systemic issues, such as inadequate training, outdated technology, or unclear procedural guidelines, rather than simply addressing symptoms. This proactive and analytical approach is crucial for sustainable improvements and avoids superficial fixes that could lead to errors or noncompliance. From a regulatory perspective, understanding the root cause ensures that any implemented solutions do not inadvertently create new compliance risks. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on increasing the volume of work assigned to slower teams, without investigating the reasons for their slower pace, is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to burnout, increased errors, and a decline in the quality of work, potentially resulting in regulatory breaches if client data is mishandled or compliance checks are rushed. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing a blanket policy of mandatory overtime for all teams, fails to acknowledge that the issue might be localized or due to specific bottlenecks. This can be inefficient, costly, and demotivating, and it doesn't address the underlying problems. It also risks creating a culture where speed is prioritized over accuracy, which is a significant ethical and regulatory concern, especially in financial services where accuracy in documentation is paramount for compliance with regulations like Know Your Customer (KIC) and anti-money laundering (AML) Requirements. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the problem and its impact. Second, gather data and analyze it to identify root causes. Third, develop and evaluate potential solutions based on their effectiveness, efficiency, and compliance implications. Fourth, implement the chosen solution and monitor its impact. And finally, iterate as necessary. This systematic process ensures that decisions are data-driven, ethically sound, and compliant with all relevant regulations. Question 18. Regulatory review indicates that a client is seeking advice on a complex tax planning strategy that promises substantial tax deferral. The client has presented a summary of their proposed approach, asserting its legality based on their interpretation of recent legislative changes. The firm's senior tax advisor has a preliminary concern that the strategy might be overly aggressive and could be challenged by the tax authorities. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firm to take in this situation? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive, independent review of the proposed tax strategy against all relevant tax legislation, official guidance, and professional standards to determine its compliance and ethical standing before advising the client. Option B. Advise the client to seek a second opinion from another firm without conducting an independent review of the proposed strategy internally. Option C. Proceed with implementing the client's proposed tax strategy, relying on the client's assurance of its legality and the potential for significant tax savings, while noting the client's assertion. Option D. Immediately reject the client's proposed tax strategy without a detailed review, based on the senior advisor's initial concern about its aggressive nature. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive, independent review of the proposed tax strategy against all relevant tax legislation, official guidance, and professional standards to determine its compliance and ethical standing before advising the client. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's desire for aggressive tax planning and the firm's obligation to adhere to regulatory requirements and ethical standards. The challenge lies in balancing client service with compliance, particularly when the proposed strategy borders on aggressive interpretation of tax law, potentially leading to scrutiny or penalties. Careful judgment is required to assess the legality and ethicality of the proposed actions. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, independent review of the proposed tax strategy against the specific provisions of the relevant tax legislation and guidance. This includes consulting official publications, case law, and any relevant professional body pronouncements. The firm must ensure that the strategy is not only technically defensible, but also aligns with the spirit of the law, avoiding interpretations that could be deemed abusive or non-compliant. This represents best professional practice because it prioritizes regulatory adherence and ethical conduct, safeguarding both the client and the firm from potential legal and reputational damage. It demonstrates a commitment to professional integrity and responsible advice. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the client's proposed strategy based solely on the client's assurance of its legality and the potential for significant tax savings. This fails to meet the professional duty of care and regulatory obligation to independently verify compliance. It risks facilitating non-compliance, which could lead to penalties for the client and disciplinary action for the firm and its professionals. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's proposal outright without a proper review, based on a general perception that aggressive tax planning is inherently problematic. A caution is warranted. A blanket rejection without due diligence fails to serve the client effectively and may overlook legitimate tax planning opportunities that are within the bounds of the law. This can damage client relationships and the firm's reputation for providing comprehensive advice. A third incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice or interpretations from external sources without rigorous verification against official guidance. This introduces a high risk of misinterpreting the law, leading to non-compliance. Professional responsibility demands that advice be grounded in authoritative sources and a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory framework. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that prioritizes understanding the client's objectives, then rigorously assessing the proposed strategy against all applicable laws, regulations, and ethical codes. This involves seeking clarification, conducting independent research, documenting the review process, and clearly communicating the risks and benefits to the client. If the strategy remains questionable, professionals should advise the client on alternative, compliant approaches or decline to act if the proposed course of action is demonstrably non-compliant or unethical. Question 19. The control framework reveals that the implementation of a new client onboarding system is being fast-tracked due to competitive pressures, with a proposal to defer a full, formal risk assessment until after the system is live. Which of the following approaches best aligns with robust control principles and regulatory expectations? Option A. Proceed with the system launch as planned, relying on the IT department's assurance that the system is secure, and conduct a post-implementation review of controls. Option B. Implement the system with minimal testing, assuming that any issues will be addressed reactively as they arise, prioritizing speed to market. Option C. Delegate the risk assessment to the marketing team, as they are most familiar with client needs and can best gauge potential issues from a user perspective. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive, documented risk assessment and develop mitigating controls before the system goes live, even if it means a slight delay in implementation. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive, documented risk assessment and develop mitigating controls before the system goes live, even if it means a slight delay in implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between maintaining robust internal controls and the pressure to expedite business processes. The need for a comprehensive risk assessment before implementing significant changes, such as a new client onboarding system, is paramount. Careful judgment is required to balance efficiency with compliance and security. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, documented risk assessment. This aligns with fundamental principles of good governance and regulatory expectations, particularly within financial services where client data and transaction integrity are critical. A systematic evaluation of potential risks, e.g., data breaches, compliance violations, operational failures, allows for the development of appropriate mitigating controls. This proactive stance minimizes the likelihood of adverse events and ensures adherence to relevant regulations, such as those pertaining to data protection and anti-money laundering, by embedding compliance from the outset. An incorrect approach that bypasses or inadequately performs the risk assessment fails to identify and address potential vulnerabilities. This creates a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Specifically, it could lead to breaches of data privacy laws, e.g., GDPR if applicable, or equivalent local regulations, resulting in substantial fines and reputational damage. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for client confidentiality and security. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on anecdotal evidence or the perceived simplicity of the system ignores the potential for unforeseen issues and systemic risks. This is a failure to exercise due diligence and professional skepticism, which are core ethical obligations. It also risks non-compliance with internal policies and external regulations that mandate risk-based approaches to system implementation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the objective and the proposed change. This is followed by identifying all relevant stakeholders and regulatory requirements. A critical step is to conduct a comprehensive risk assessment, documenting potential threats and vulnerabilities. Based on this assessment, appropriate controls are designed and implemented. Finally, ongoing monitoring and review ensure the continued effectiveness of the controls and compliance with evolving regulations. This structured, risk-aware process is essential for sound professional judgment. Question 20. Strategic planning requires a firm to consider cost reduction measures. If a firm is contemplating significant staff reductions in its client advisory departments to improve profitability, what is the most prudent approach to ensure ongoing regulatory compliance and client trust? Option A. Outsource a significant portion of client advisory functions to third-party providers to reduce direct staffing costs, without a thorough due diligence process on the provider's compliance frameworks. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment of proposed staff reductions on client service delivery, regulatory obligations, and operational risks before implementing any changes. Option C. Implement a phased reduction in staff, focusing on non-client-facing roles first, and monitor client feedback closely for any negative trends. Option D. Immediately proceed with the staff reduction to achieve the desired cost savings, and address any client or regulatory issues as they arise. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment of proposed staff reductions on client service delivery, regulatory obligations, and operational risks before implementing any changes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for cost reduction with the long-term implications for client trust and regulatory compliance. Pressure to cut expenses can lead to overlooking critical risk management procedures, which are fundamental to maintaining client confidence and adhering to regulatory standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that cost-saving measures do not compromise the integrity of financial advice or expose the firm to undue risk. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough risk assessment before implementing any changes. This aligns with the principles of responsible financial management and client duty of care, which are often enshrined in regulatory frameworks such as the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) handbook in the UK. Specifically, the FCA's Principles for Businesses (PRIN) emphasize the need for firms to act with integrity, skill, care, and diligence, and to have adequate systems and controls in place to manage risks. A systematic review of potential impacts on client outcomes and regulatory adherence before making decisions ensures that the firm remains compliant and continues to act in its clients' best interests, thereby safeguarding its reputation and long-term viability. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost savings without considering the impact on client service or regulatory compliance would represent a significant failure. For instance, reducing staff in client-facing roles without adequate reallocation of responsibilities or training could lead to a decline in service quality, potentially breaching the FCA's PRIN 6, Customers' Interests, and PRIN 7, Communications with Clients. Another incorrect approach might involve cutting back on essential compliance training or technology, which could lead to breaches of various regulatory requirements, including those related to anti-money laundering, AML, and data protection, thereby risking substantial fines and reputational damage. Ignoring the potential for increased operational risk due to understaffing or inadequate systems would also be a failure to adhere to the firm's duty to manage its business effectively and prudently, as expected by regulators. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core objective, cost reduction, then systematically evaluates potential strategies against key criteria: client impact, regulatory compliance, operational risk, and long-term business sustainability. This involves consulting relevant internal policies, regulatory guidance, and potentially seeking expert advice. The process should involve a multi-stakeholder review, including compliance, risk management, and business operations, to ensure all perspectives are considered before a final decision is made and implemented.